see our news, bad news is coming to you. Extra, extra, read all about it.
Well, we are here. We're back in the studio, and we are live. And today we're going to have a conversation with a Boston City Councilor. It's election year, but this is not why I wanted Councilor Erin Murphy to be with us this morning. I wanted to say to her again, for the 175th time, how thankful I am when our church had a problem, and I reached out to all of the Boston City Councilors. I sent the communication out, and she was the first. Her office responded to me in the church quickly and resolved the problem. It's amazing. Many other people came afterwards, but you responded. And so what I learned from that experience from you, and I'm continually learning, is about constituency services. That the position of a city councilor is to help those people, not just the ones who voted for you, but to help all of those people in the city, because you're citywide.
I am.
When they call and say, I need help. And so I'll forever be appreciative of that outreach and other things that you are beginning to do with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it very much. And so this morning I wanted to spend some time just talking with you. We're talking together, and I wanted to ask you, because we never really sat down and had our cup of tea and coffee yet, why did you decide to run for the Boston City Council, number one? And you were courageous enough not just to say I want to run, but you said I want to go citywide. That is huge for the first time. So talk to us about that.
And maybe I was a little naive of how huge that was now. So lots of reasons, and it's probably the number one question I get. I was Boston public school teacher for over 20 years, but before that, grew up in a family right down the street here in Dorchester where community advocacy and helping neighbors and coming together to knowing that if big things need to be fixed or there's big problems, that we can't do it alone. So we have to, even if we have differing opinions, to come together matters. My grandfather, Richard J. Murphy, back in the 60s, formed DUNA, which is still around, the Dorchester United Neighborhood Association.
Okay.
He lived in the Pope's Hill section at that time, right behind the empty fields. That is now the ball fields in the Richard J. Murphy School. And Kevin White was going to be building community centers. We have a lot, we have the Lee right down the street from here. And he wanted, our neighborhood, Dorchester, to get not just another school, but a community center, because he knew. And growing up in that community center, I realized how important it is for outreach and opportunities for not just our youth, but our seniors, and a place for neighbors to go. So he knew to do it alone would probably be impossible. So he reached out to neighbors around in other parts of Dorchester to say, hey, let's work together. And, the organization is still around, which says it's doing something good, right? And I was in the first kindergarten class there, which was wonderful. And my Auntie Kay and my mom started the teen center up in the gym, one of the first city teen centers that is thriving still today. And I think a model right across the city, that it's not just opening a building, as a church, it's not, your building matters for holding space, but also engaging and activating people.
But you were a teacher, you were helping to shape lives and minds.
Yes.
And so to leave that after all the years that you were doing that, I was a clerk magistrate at Boston Juvenile Court for 19 years.
Wow. Okay.
And made a decision for health reasons to leave the court and come to the church full time. I couldn't continue to do both. And it took a while to make that decision. I struggled with that decision.
It definitely took me a few years. I did not leave teaching discouraged or upset, wanting a new career path. It was more, to me, in many of my years I spent with the little ones, kindergarten, special ed, ESL. So, helping with the special ed coordinator with families who are BPS is an enormous organization that many parents feel they do not know how to navigate. So a lot of my time was spent educating and nurturing young children, which was probably the most fulfilling part. But the other part of my job that I always took extremely seriously and really prided myself on was my relationships I built with the families and then helped them navigate the city. So I often thought I didn't really know what they did in City Hall. You see the Wednesday meetings, and
Yeah.
I know we'll talk about that in
Yeah,
a little bit,
yeah.
but I knew that I could help families across the city as I was in the classroom, but I could bring it to a bigger level. And as a Boston public school teacher, I've educated kids from all neighborhoods. I live in District 3, I live in Dorchester, but I wanted to run for one of the at-large because I think it's definitely a different mindset, right? You kind of have a lens of the whole city, but trying to piece things together and help more people and not really pigeonhole yourself into one thing.
Well, you had to do something that I hate to do in running for office. You have to pick up the phone
Yeah.
and call people and ask them to support you by giving, by
Yes.
helping you in the campaign.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Was that easy for you? What was-
No. I knew it was necessary, so I knew I had to do it. And when I ran in 2019, I almost won. And it's why I got sworn in December 1st of 2022, because I had run in 2019. And, Mayor Wu had moved on early to be the mayor, so her seat opened. So
Yeah.
I was able to fill her seat for
Yeah.
that and then got sworn in last January for my full term. The first thing is trying to convince people that, to trust me, right? I think for many candidates, if they're first in the race or continuing to reach out to people, is I'm someone you can trust, and how do I convey that in a 2-3 minute call, and then at the end of it ask you not just for your vote, but can you help, because without raising money you can't win. But for me, and if you saw that my numbers come out in my first race as a first-time candidate citywide, I topped the ticket. I
Yeah.
beat Anissa, Michelle, and Michael in precincts in my neighborhood, and I think that spoke volumes to when people know me, they trust me. So my job was to get to more neighborhoods. So it took me two times, but I continued after the 19 race to just keep going outside of my base in my neighborhood and talk to people to say, hey, you should trust me, and this is why. And I always say, it's my actions, not just my words, right? But I think that really matters. Watch me, right? So I can stand up and say, there's great speakers and great preachers, and they can be really moving, but does that turn into action after we finish talking?
Right.
And do we really connect? Because most of the work I feel in my job is never on social media, right? Those late night calls, those, connections with people are very personal. So it's not that you're not sharing most of the good work you're doing. And I do say to myself, but also my staff, we have to remember, all our wins. And our wins aren't always how many likes on social media or who retweeted it. Or,
What are the analytics? Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Which is important because, you started to say, there's a science to politics.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
can't ignore the fact that, you need to get the votes, you need to raise the money, and how do you do that most effectively? But I think this past year and a half now that I've been in office, that I've shown that I've kept my promise.
Okay, so you made it in.
Made it
You're
in.
a citywide city councilor.
Yes.
What was some of the eye-opening experiences that you walked into? You
Yeah.
said, "This is not what I thought it was," or "It was." How do you galvanize others to support your ideas and your vision
Yeah.
for the city?
So the first, and you don't know what you don't know. So when I first got there, it was more about trying to find my way around
Okay.
City Hall.
Okay.
But the first thing I did, and I think it really, really built a strong foundation for our office, was I just picked up the phone and I started walking to different departments and just saying, hey, I'm Erin Murphy. I went to the transportation department, Age Strong. I went into Public Works. And at first there was a buzz around and I was getting calls from Intergovernmental and others saying, what are you doing? Or I picked up the phone and called, commissioner of one department. And they're like, what's wrong? And I was like, well, nothing. I'm just introducing myself. I
Sure,
don't know you
sure,
yet. I just
right.
want you to know. Maybe someday I'll need you. But right now I'm just saying hello. It's polite, but I think all of those things that our parents taught us, there's a reason, right? Because then that, you need a relationship, because some of those people I was calling at midnight because someone's heat was off,
Yep,
or
yep.
I needed to get some food access,
Yep.
or I'm calling Sheila Dillon on a Sunday morning at 6 a.m. because a fire happened and they're still not getting connected with
Yep.
housing. And if they don't see your name pop up or know that you're somebody who cared enough to say, introduce yourself first, I think that says a lot, and that helps with those relationships. So the first thing was building the relationships, but then all of that other stuff is happening too. We have council meetings, we file hearing orders, we can pass legislation. The budget season came upon us. So, and then I also really care about citywide. I'm not a district councilor, but I do think I know our office does an amazing job with constituent services for all different areas. If it's, sharing grants to, visiting seniors who are, suffering from isolation and other things, or connecting youth to hope, which I think hope to me translates to a good, safe school, a job. Maybe mom needs a job,
Yeah.
the family, wrapping it around. It's not just one person in the family. And I knew that from my years and decades in the school, and as a mother myself, I raised my children here. They're young adults now, that when one person suffers in a family, the whole family suffers. So to make sure that we don't disregard,
I've often said to people, when a family member goes to jail, the whole family's in jail.
Yeah,
It's the same thing with sickness. The whole family is
Sure.
dealing with it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I read about you is that you have a passion for helping people who are trying to recover.
Yeah.
You're dealing with helping people to deal with addiction and homelessness. So the whole mass and cast must have been something that
Huge.
wrecked you.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts regarding
Absolutely.
what needs to be done there, and why the passion with recovery services, addiction, homelessness? Help
Yeah.
us understand that.
Sure. So in 2014, way before I was sitting in my kindergarten classroom wondering if I wanted to make a move, I had a loved one on Long Island and got a call in the middle of the night. They were in a cab. So I was that mother who, like you mentioned, when one person goes to
Yeah.
jail, everyone goes to jail. When one person in your family is suffering through addiction and substance use disorder and mental health, the whole family is suffering.
Yeah.
And for many that night when Long Island was evacuated, not everyone made it back, because for me that time it was a safe space and they were moving to like recovery path, which is months, years, lifetime. And so it was interrupted, and I didn't know, would we get back on track with this? And with the grace of God, and I also say that I learned a lot before, and now even more so, mind-blowing how rich we are as a city and how many resources we have, but not everyone is connected. And myself, who felt like I was, very active in my community, a school teacher, and I didn't know about all of this, but it was a call to my district counselor at the time, Frank Baker, in an emergency room at the Kearney Hospital, who then connected me to John McGann at the Gavin Foundation. And from that point on, just have been forever grateful to that organization, because it saved my family's life. And so I have a different lens on Mass and Cass, and I think of it, it's tough because there's people suffering, and there's people suffering all the time. Most of it is behind closed doors, but for that, it's in your face. So if you drive, which I do often, I try to not numb myself. I think you talk probably, or I hear a lot in churches like about violence. Like if we just normalize it, we can't normalize it.
Well, just accepting it. Oh, it's going to happen.
Oh, another one.
Right.
Or
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
only
yeah.
15,
You
not
can't-
18
yeah,
dead
yeah,
this year. Like
yeah.
that's okay. So for me, I make it a conscious effort to visit and to go down there and really talk with the people on the ground, because I do know they're doing amazing work down there, but it's not enough.
So let's go back to what you said, is that you were looking for help. The number of people who are suffering and do not know how to do that.
Yeah.
And it's just spinning their wheels. And sometimes while you're trying to help a loved one and you're trying to find the help, another member of the family goes under
Crumbles, yeah.
struggling because you haven't been able to even deal with the first one.
And then there's that mother guilt.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Yeah, it's the same. Any good teacher will tell you have that teacher guilt. If one needs a little more time, like how do you? Because there's never enough hours in the day. If you're someone who I know I am. I'm an empathetic person who wants to help people, and I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to, but I do show up and I listen. And I think it takes time to get trust in those neighborhoods and communities where they didn't know me before. So the last couple years, I just keep being me and trying to prove it through my actions and where you see me show up and what I do.
Well, there's one other question I want to ask you just regarding this, and then we'll move on. It's my understanding that you run marathons.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Well, that tied into the Gavin Foundation.
Okay.
Where 2015, so I was still, and I still am, involved closely with the Gavin Foundation, which is one of many, but they're an amazing organization in Boston who helps and sees that whole family approach, not just those. They have the Gavin House in South Boston, but they run many recovery homes across the city and supports. And they work closely. You may have worked with them in the court system too, for people who need to, the Ostagai High School and others, for our teenagers who are in recovery. So to me, I was never a runner, and I watched I'd go to the marathon. My mom, my stepdad had run the marathon, so it's not something I didn't know about, but it's definitely something I never saw myself doing. Yep. And I thought, oh, you know what? I'm just going to go for a walk. And the Dorchester Running Club had formed, and I joined one day. I went down on a Saturday morning, and I started to walk, and then I ran a little. And my pals I became friendly with all of them, and they're like, just run a mile. And then the next week, just run another mile. And then I'm like 6 weeks in, I'm like, I just ran a 5K. I thought I never would. Wow. And realizing when you put your mind to something, and for me, it was therapy, running and just having my mind. I never wear like headphones or music. I just run with my thoughts. And I got a marathon bib through, the Mayor Walsh's administration. And I didn't want to just run for nothing. I was like, I want to run for a cause. So I ran, and I raised over $60,000 for the Gavin Foundation. I ran in 3 years in a row. And I wore my T-shirt. It said "Heroin sucks," because to me, it was like no other thing to say about it, right? There were people cheering along the route because they just understood. It's like, this is bad. We have to fight the stigma. We still do, even though it's a little bit more open to talk about. But the stigma ties into the isolation, which we talked about, ties into families feeling that they can't explain why you late for work. Why are you upset? Why didn't you do your homework? Well, mom was in the emergency room with, there's so much trauma in families that go unnoticed or aren't talked about or accepted in schools and workplace.
Yesterday, I went to the airport to pick up my wife. Driving back, I always go by Mass and Cass. It's a miracle mile, they call it in the churches. And I looked at it, and I didn't see the number of people that I used to see out on the streets. Whose responsibility is it to address that? Is it the city council? Is it the mayor?
Us, I think. I think this is everyone has to, and we may not all have the same idea of outcome. And while you probably didn't see people right on the main street, as there's been a push in the before the winter, the tents and everything were moved to the side street. So you don't see it as much, but there are still, I think there's over 47 tents this morning if you drove by, attached. Because this time last year, the mayor had announced, the tents got down. We did low threshold housing for many. So I think it's all of our responsibility. But I think I know that for me, it's not just supporting those struggling, it's supporting the residents in the neighborhood, the schools and the businesses.
So it's both.
It's everyone. Right. So we can't ignore that people live in that area. People own businesses. People are trying to survive. At the same time, we do have people struggling, and it's that balance of making sure that we're not just excluding or not listening to the needs of some groups affected and only helping one group.
So the committees that you serve on, there are 3 committees, correct?
Well, 2, but one has a really long name.
Okay.
The mental health, public health, mental health recovery and homelessness.
Yes.
Which is a good one. They're all good. All the committees are good. And then also Veteran Services.
So just regarding the homeless then, so it's all of our responsibility. So what would you say, we may not have the time, the 3 hours to come up with a solution, but quickly, what do you think is the answer to that situation? Because the roundhouse, was that where people were being housed there for
Yeah,
a period of time?
they were.
Is that no longer being
It's
used?
still, but it's winding down because the funding is done
Oh.
soon, and then someone else owns that building, so they're in talks. The state, so the state has and needs to continue to be part of the conversation and part of the funding, because we know it's not just a city of Boston issue. It's in our neighborhood, so we do have to take responsibility for
yeah.
it. But we do have to continue to have partnerships with the Public Health Commission, the state public health, and also the governor and other state representatives. I know that the state delegation in Boston does take it seriously and thinks it's also their responsibility.
Yep.
And to get, because, they can pass things at the State House and then we can work on
Yeah,
things at the
yeah,
City Hall.
yeah.
And the mayor's committed. She
Yeah.
is. And people have different opinions on what is the policy and how do we get to the end result. To me, I was here in your church one night when there was someone struggling and they weren't ready for recovery.
Yeah, yeah.
There's beds for people who want to sleep at night, and we just know if it's mental health, whatever reason, there are people who don't always want to take the help and they're not ready for it,
Right.
and you have to be okay with that.
Right.
But those who are ready or want a warm place to sleep, we have to make sure we connect them to places because we have enough beds to make sure people are housed. Long term, what do? Everyone deserves the dignity of a warm bed and a warm meal. But what do we do long term? Because it's a lot of mental health interventions, recovery supports. The statistics show that it's really hard to break habits like that. So what are we doing as a society, working together with all of the nonprofits and state agencies to at least, make it better for those lives there?
So what did my last question on this? So what do you think about the sheriffs saying, "I want to open up
Sure.
a section"? Did you support it? Not support it?
I
Didn't
supported
understand
it, but I think it's because I talked to him about what he meant by
Okay,
it.
all right.
So I didn't just say, because for a lot of people, their first reaction, if they just saw a soundbite, it was like, they're not criminals.
right.
Why
Why
are we putting
doing
them in
that?
jail?
Right.
We're not. It was a section of the jail. It's like when we're turning hotels into like homeless shelters.
Yeah,
It's a section of the jail that it wasn't being used for prisoners, so inmates. So he was going to make changes to it, and the facility itself is a good setup already. It has the bones of a building that has, bathrooms and showers and a kitchen
And they weren't going to be in cells.
Not at all. They were going to be in rooms very similar and maybe even nicer to like the roundhouse rooms that they have over at the hotel or other places that we housed some of the people on Mass and Cass that day.
So why such the pushback? And is that off the table now?
I think I'm hopeful. I don't think anything's off the table. In life, not just in government, you try something like we're a year later looking back at the 10-point summer plan that the mayor had proposed last summer, and we still have people on the street struggling. So, and I don't think anyone can make that go away forever, but I think everything, when we relook at and assess and say what went well and what didn't go well. But I do believe that we as a city can do a better job, especially those who get a seat at the table to talk about it, to not want to own sometimes I think it becomes a little political, like they want to own the solution instead of saying, here's my suggestion. This is one piece to the big puzzle of the solution, that we have to be okay with trying lots of different things. As long as all of the ideas are respectful to those people, I think we should just keep trying and assess and then go back and make changes if necessary. And if it worked great, expand it. If it didn't work the way we wanted, how do we tweak it? I mean, I'm in community meetings all the time when it's around development or traffic, and they talk about pilot programs all the time, and neighborhoods are like, wait, we don't think it's going to work. And it's like, well, let's just try. And then we'll come back and see, and then we can make changes. So I think that approach has to be stronger in this problem in the city.
Well, that's something that I would like to continue to talk with you about, the homeless and what needs to be done, and then holding the council accountable for something happening that's going to work. Before we go any further, I saw the East Boston Times Free Press, your letter to the editor, and I've read it, and let me just say that I was impressed. And why don't you tell people what happened and why you wrote this letter, and what are you hoping will happen as a result of it?
So, as a mom who raised my children, and as a teacher for over 20-something years, I absolutely have the expertise and experience on the council as an educator, but not just an educator, someone who's worked directly in the Boston public school system for over 2 decades. So I understand it.
You know it well.
I know it.
Yeah.
It's what I lived. I lived it for so many years, and I worked on ESL, special ed, the IEP side and the general ed side. So I also know all the different departments that have to work together, and sometimes things break down. And if you follow me on the council, you'll know I have filed. This is one of many things that I've filed questioning our systems. Our Boston public school system is a rich city, is a rich system.
Yeah.
We have $1.67 billion, and we're declining enrollment. We have enough money to get this right. We absolutely do. But there are times like we weren't able to pay our teachers the retro pay. We don't get our kids to school on time. Our bus system, so I've had hearing orders around systems that aren't working in BPS. And one of the systems that they made changes to a couple of years ago is how we accept students into the exam schools, which there's 3 exam schools, and many kids work really hard, and families, to them, that's their only option, because not all of our other high schools are quality schools, which is another issue we can talk about, which is discouraging, when 91% of the students at Madison Park High do not read on grade level. And I say, that to me is the school to prison pipeline.
Right.
When we're socially promoting kids or dumping, and to me, I would never, but it seems like we just dump kids into empty seats, and we're not connecting them with the services that we have the money to do. And we have people who are hired to do it, so we have to do a better job there. And this, to me, was another example of the city the school system not being transparent. And when you find there's a problem, or somebody says, hey, this happened, I got a few calls from parents saying their student's GPA was miscalculated and they're having a hard time fixing it. Yeah. So I scratched the surface, and when I looked a little deeper, and then I saw, so I don't have all the answers yet. We're going to continue. We have a meeting next week, and I'm going to file some questions at the next council meeting to get answers, because what happened, and how many kids were affected, how many families were affected, and when are we going to figure out and make sure that the kids who deserve to be there, and there's so many kids across the city.
When I saw this in the papers, it was shocking. Then when I read your first sentence, I share the discouragement felt by so many parents and families this week upon learning of Boston Public Schools' error in calculating student GPS to determine student eligibility for our 3 exam schools. How do you make that kind of a mistake?
Yeah. And they make mistakes like that a lot. And so we have to make sure. And then if the parents hadn't spoken out, it may never had been reported,
right.
Which is discouraging to me. That we have to make sure. And I have a meeting with the superintendent, so I can't quote her or say that she isn't going to be transparent. But at this point, I haven't gotten a statement other than what I saw the paper reported that they're working on it, but we have to absolutely. And for many families, especially like other options, like they're not an option. A private school isn't an option. Moving isn't an option.
Yeah.
And kids deserve quality high school options. And these 3 exam schools have a new system of how you get in. And when they don't do it correctly, and I want to look closely at which students' GPAs were miscalculated.
So
How many kids? Yeah.
So that information has to be tabulated, and you want it brought to you. But when they bring it to you and they tell you that now, how do you
Right.
correct that?
And for many families, or all families, March is the time you would find out. And it's the same time you find out if you've applied to other schools. So there are students who have been offered a Metco seat. There are students who put a $500 deposit down to a Archie's or another school, but they really want to stay in Boston and they really can't afford the tuition. And now they're going to not get their deposit back because maybe in May they can't fix this quick enough for families to know in time to make decisions. So when we have families in the city who don't have the peace of mind of knowing where their kids are going to go to high school, that's a problem to me. We have to do better than that.
It's a lot, and the other thing is that you do not want to alienate people in the school department. That you want to work with them.
course.
You don't want to
It's
alienate them.
that fine balance.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if you're running around with signs saying "down with the school department" because
Yeah.
of what you're doing to the
They're
kids,
never gonna answer
they're
my
not going
call.
to work with you, right?
Right.
So it's a very
Oh.
difficult way that you have to tread,
And that's something
yeah.
you do learn when you mention like what's the first thing. I talked about the relationships, but also I'm not afraid of hard conversations. So I'm not going to back down just because I want to make sure that the mayor answers a call one day, or that the superintendent, especially when I'm not digging to make a story up, when it really is like when 520 kids every morning are not being picked up at buses, and I'm trying to find out what percentage of those are students on IEPs and how many kids end up not even making it to school.
That's
When over 40% of our students are chronically absent, when they're not even making it to school. Like, who are these kids?
when
They can't, because in government, a lot of times they turn into a number, a data point, but to
Yeah.
me, they're people, they're humans, they're families, they're kids.
When I was in the court and some young people were picked up shoplifting in the stores downtown, and they should have been in school, they brought the children into the court, and I talked to the truant officer, and we found out that there was a problem with the child didn't want to go back to school for a certain reason, but he didn't have the answer because the people at the school department were not giving it to him. So I issued a subpoena to the school superintendent, and he or she never came, but they always sent their attorneys. And I said, well, the superintendent is going to have to come.
Eventually,
And
yeah.
they need to be here at 9 o'clock, and I might get to the case by 3. All of my problems were solved. They solved the problems.
Right,
with that.
yeah.
So I didn't care anymore about
Yeah.
having a relationship with the school department. Kids were going.
Well, that's what I say. There's certain hills I'm willing to die on, and if it's advocating for our kids and families and all of our residents,
Yep.
but that's definitely something I'm okay. And I do believe, because I'm a good person, that if they don't like me because I'm doing my job, then that's on them, that's on me. I can't worry about that. But if I know that I'm being respectful but asking the hard questions, and that's one of the powers we do have, and we have to, as a body, make sure that we respect that and support each other. The powers we have are to hold hearings, and that means any department head we ask to come to a hearing, they have to come. There have been lots of times where they don't come, or they send someone who doesn't have
Right,
the answer,
right.
and it's discouraging. And if you watch some of the council hearings, not the Wednesday meeting, but you'll hear it's like, well, where's the administration?
Right.
Or we'll get back to you, or we don't know. Councilor Mejia and I had a hearing last year about school violence, and one of the questions we wanted to know were like, how many kids last school year were sexually assaulted? How many kids were bullied? They're like, oh, we don't have that number. And I'm like, but that's what the meeting's about. We were both discouraged. Like, come to the meeting. And we don't call people into hearings that often, but make sure you come and you have answers so that we can, because to me, that information helps us then change policy.
But if they,
I can't advocate for families and residents
have the
if I
data.
don't know what the issues are.
yeah, but when they don't come for the third time, what authority do you have to push the envelope?
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you can send Ron Cobb, our city messenger, and he can send a subpoena that they're being, subpoenaed in, which has happened, I guess, in the past. It may need to happen. You can stop the business of the meeting on the council floor on Wednesday saying, you're still waiting. It's been 3 weeks. I demand an answer. Until I get this answer, I'm stopping the council business. There are things. I mean, I hope we don't have to get there, but
Yeah.
there are times I do feel like you've got to, and that's why it's important. One of the other things I did and I continue to do is we're a city that has a charter and we have council rules, and it's very, very important in my role and for myself and my staff to really understand what is the charter that really governs what we can and cannot do, and what are the city rules. What are the rules of the council, not the city rules, but the rules of the council, so that I do know, like, what powers do I have, and what, how do we run as a body? Because we're only going to run effectively if we all understand. I think of it back to like my classroom days.
Yeah.
If the classroom knows the rules and we all do our best to follow them, and the rules are agreed upon because we vote on them in January
Yeah,
when
yeah.
we're sworn in, and we follow them, then it's like Robert's rules. Like, we're gonna flow better. We're gonna get our work done, because we don't want to waste time bickering or debating about what the rules are. Let's just let each one of us do what we want, because we are all filing different hearing orders, because we're all focusing on different things we really care about.
Let's talk about race.
Sure.
So, but I don't know how to step into this other than to ask you directly. Do you think that there is a racial divide at the Boston City Council? It's a very general question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's a racial divide. I think there's really strong personalities, and we have 9 district councilors, and I do appreciate that each district councilor, which is a different role, which I also learned very quickly, they're representing different parts of the city, and I have to applaud. Most of them, if not all of them, really understand what their neighborhoods want, and they're different. So what the neighborhood wants in D7 is very different than it is in D8, and that district councilor is very strong and loud across the city, depending on what district they're in. And so there are times we don't agree. And there are times when it comes to a vote, we definitely don't vote together.
Yeah.
But I don't believe it's based on racial lines. I think it's more based on different opinions and what we think the solution is to get to the end result. Because I often say, when I've had conversations, which I do believe we need to have more personal conversations on the council, like I sat down with Jessica Tang in the school union, and at the end of the conversation, she's like, I'm really surprised. You and I agree on, I think, 98% of the same thing. I go, exactly. There's a impression about me or about my other colleagues, and what you see on Wednesday in the meetings or what you see on social media isn't always never the whole story. So when you actually talk to people and see, like, I've had conversations with colleagues where they're like, oh, wait, you mean we want the same thing? I'm like, right, so let's work together to get there.
So, for example, the whole discussion regarding protecting the young people in school.
Oh, yes.
And so I've talked to a number of city councilors about the metal detectors, about the police returning to the school under Larry Ellison's leadership. And most of the black and brown city councilors, no metal detectors, no police in the school.
And I believe that's a miscommunication. So, and I appreciate that. And I have a hearing next 2 weeks. And the superintendent, she's coming. She told me she was, and I believe the police commissioner. So this is my opinion on that.
Okay.
And that's one of the things when I spoke with Jessica Tang, she realized we actually agree on almost all of the same things here. I know as a mom, just being in, you don't need to be a mom to know that education is not going to happen if the schools don't have a strong, safe culture.
Yep.
And the culture isn't only physical safety, it's a lot of things. And that's important. And I know as a classroom teacher, to me, the social emotional wellness of all of my children and everyone feeling welcome and heard and thriving is important. There are times, which we can't deny, the data shows it, that as young as first grade, there are kids coming to school with weapons. There are fights happening in our school. There was a time 5 years ago, before the police reform bill, where the Boston police had a stronger relationship with the school department. So I want to make it clear that the Boston police are in the business of keeping our city safe. They're in the public safety business. Our schools are in the business of educating our kids. The police do not want to do the job of the schools. They don't. But at times, when an incident happens in our office, myself personally gets calls where something dangerous is happening.
Yeah.
And if a teacher or a staff member or a principal or a student afraid in the bathroom feels like they cannot call 911
Yep.
because there's been this culture that the police aren't part of the solution, the police are bad, don't call them. And there have been close calls and
Yeah,
times
yeah.
where they were not allowed in. I do not believe, and they don't want to do this either, that any police officer would spend any part of their day in a school building for no reason. It's when something happens, if 911 needs to be called,
Yeah.
that they're welcome and they're part of the conversation and the solution, that they're not locked out at the door. There's also times, if you follow Nora Baston or the community policing, which is a wonderful, nationally recognized. There's also times, which I believe is getting better under the new administration, where police would just be at the basketball game or coaching in the afternoon, because those relationships have broken down also. The police don't want to go to any school. They're not welcome. Nobody wants to. And I know I've heard that directly from the police department, that they're not trying to get into schools if they're not welcome. It's when a public safety issue happens, we need to
They
make
have
sure.
yeah.
Got to call 911. And if 911 has to be called, no one should be in trouble for that. I think it's more about hiding the perception, because then it gets in the news, or then the news crew comes, and then they don't want to deal with answering to the news crew, which I don't think should be the issue.
So, but when you have a group of city councilors who are going in one direction, decision-wise,
Yeah.
voting-wise,
Yeah.
and another group, a larger group, going in another direction, and it's black and brown in
It
another
is.
direction.
It is.
And white city councilors going in another direction. That creates a racial divide. It's emotional,
Visually, yeah, absolutely.
theological, not theological,
Yeah.
theoretically.
Yep.
So
I do believe that people vote on the council to support colleagues and maybe not agree. That happens. Like, okay, if you want to stop her, like I've stood up to file a 17F, which was a request for information, which is one of our very strongest powers on the council. And one councilor denied it, and one vote saying no, and then it's never happened in the history of the city council. So there are times I think it's more about, not to me, it doesn't seem like it's about race. It's more about relationships or like feelings people have towards each other. I mean, I see my job as an at-large city councilor. Like, I'm in every neighborhood across the city, so I get to work alongside and see the different district councilors.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I
Yeah.
do believe they care about their neighborhoods, and they can be very strong. But there are definitely people who will just vote no to vote no. Because when the conversation, I've often said, wait, you're filing something the next week. That's exactly what I filed. So you agree, or you want to get to the bottom of this issue also. So it's more about not wanting to work together than it is about our values or opinions on the actual issue.
So, just for the record, my perspective on regarding metal detectors, safety of young people in the
Yes.
schools. I volunteered to work with young people in the 80s at a particular place in the city. And they couldn't afford a metal detector, but they needed something because kids were bringing guns into this establishment. And so they got the wand, and they were able to do that.
Yeah.
And every young person knew that if you were going into this place,
You had to be one.
you had to be screened, right? And you had to be frisked and screened. And what we found out is that because the kids knew that, they left their weapons outside.
Yep, out the door.
And we knew where they were putting them because
Yeah.
there weren't too many places to put them.
Yep.
And the people who owned the establishment would go out and grab their weapons, and we had a safe night. So I support the idea of having metal detectors in schools because obviously we've had situations where people didn't bring their weapons into schools. They did. The weapons were outside, and they used them when kids
When
were
they
coming
came out, and
right?
that's happened, right? Tech High, Dorchester High, right down the street. And so I appreciate that because I'm not naive. The front door is not the only place kids come in either. One of the audits that the school had to go through because, DESE had found many areas of our school department that are failing, and one of them is the safety and the communication to families and staff around safety. And one of the audits had to be like really blacked out and shared because it showed how many school buildings, how many doors and windows
Yeah.
are not secured in
Yeah.
our system.
Right.
And so if a kid wants to go in the back door or a friend's going to open the side door to let them in, it is humanly impossible to stop it all from happening. But we know that at City Hall, we go through, airports, Disney Worlds, the courthouse, hospitals. There's so many places where we do have to go through. I think it's more about a conversation with the kids to know this is why. And so if you do feel like, talk about it. Why do you feel like it's not something you want? And there's also technology. And that's one thing we've talked to the superintendent about. And I know Councilor Flaherty, and we're looking forward to this meeting, is that there's technology now where it can be in the door jam. So if it's a physical appearance of, I feel like I'm walking into a jail, I don't feel like feels like a school,
Right.
then we can invest in technology that, like you said, you didn't have the money, so you used the wand. Well, maybe we put the metal detectors in the door jam so kids aren't even realizing. They're just flowing in and out of the school.
So,
But to me, can I just...
go ahead.
But to me, the issue to me at the end of the day is there are kids there are weapons in our schools, and there are times when we've seen it this year alone, and we know, I get video, there's kids like in bathrooms who don't feel safe, and there's fights happening. So the metal detectors aren't going to stop.
it's not going to stop
And
that.
it's not going to
Right.
stop the sexual assaults
right,
and the
right.
bullying happening in the school. It's
Right.
just one of a bigger issue of things we have to address when it comes to safety. Safety isn't just weapons to me. It's also really investing in guidance counselors and athletics. I'm a big proponent of investing more in sports and arts and before and after school programming and making sure that kids want to come to school. Why are 42% of our kids not showing up to school on a regular basis?
Yeah.
Give them a reason. And the teachers I know, as being one, and my daughter's a teacher now, they work really hard. But there's systems in place to make their job harder that we can really help support. And that's something I can do on the council. I can continue to advocate for more equitable before and after school programming, arts and music and gym and basketball, after school volleyball.
Okay, so this is funny. We've been talking for 49 minutes,
Oh,
if you
yes.
can believe that. And when you came in, and I knew we were going to have this discussion, because we haven't sat down and had this discussion
No, we haven't yet. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I was concerned that you were going to be relaxed, because I don't know what people say about me or my interview style, or people that want to attack you. I wanted you to be relaxed enough so
No,
we can
I-
have a real conversation. And we have a few minutes left to sort of try to go here. And then I want to give you, you have decided to
I have.
run again. Have you
I'm
filed
doing-
your papers?
I did.
Okay.
I was down there on the first day. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I saw some counselors
Posting?
with their nomination papers, smiling.
Oh, yeah, I got my picture out.
Okay, so
I was down there with Sabino in the election department. Yep.
So with the time that we have left, can you explain to me why the new district map has caused
Sure.
such concern and is in the federal court system
It
right now?
is.
So talk about that.
Sure. So once every 10 years, we have the federal, the census that comes from the federal government, and the council has to look at the 9 district maps. And
Yeah.
if you look at the history of the city council, we were at one point all citywide councilors. And this is our 4th district map,
Okay.
where it's happened 3 times before over the past 30 years, where councilors had to come together adding a district, looking at the population, and they do it at the state level. Last year, the senators and the state reps did it for their districts also. So we were tasked with redistricting,
Yeah.
which is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And for me, as an at-large city councilor, I need the votes across the city.
Yeah.
But I also know that for me, I wanted to make sure that the process was transparent and that it was also that we heard the voices of the communities.
Yeah.
And we also heard the voices of the communities of those most affected by changes. And one of the rules that you are to follow, and that has always been in the history of redistricting, is that you don't make unnecessary disruptions. And if you're making disruptions in certain districts and you can't explain why, other than because you personally want to break up a community or a neighborhood, because I'm a pro at this now. There's terms and acronyms I didn't know before, but communities of interest is one. Codman Square. Like if we cut Codman Square, right up Washington Street,
Yeah.
what does that do to this neighborhood? In the district I live in, District 3, there were maps, and then it was clear early on that this map already had the support, like we talked earlier, but the votes on the council, and we didn't have that many community meetings or even working sessions among us. And D3 councilor kept pleading, like he should, like councilors always do for their own neighborhood.
Sure.
Kenzie Bach and Tanya Fernandez Anderson and others were like, no, don't move that street.
Right,
Or, Brian
right,
Worrell's like,
yeah.
no, we need to keep that part of Mattapan.
Yeah.
I know that neighborhood. I know those people. I know those business owners. And to pull out 4 districts at the bottom of District 3, where District 3, the only task we needed to do is that District 2, which is Chinatown, South Boston, and the South End, they had too many. He had 12,000, D2 had 12,000 too many population-wise. So we needed to take precincts away from District 2 to get the target population for all 9 districts was 75,000. And since we have a little over 700,000 population, so we were trying to get to 75,000 within a 5% range, and that was our legal obligation. And D2 needed to lose precincts and in a smaller proportion, but D3, the south part of Dorchester, needed to gain about 5,000 people.
Okay.
So the first task we needed to do is which precincts are we going to add to District 3? But one map came in that was taking thousands of people out of District 3 when what we needed for District 3 was to add people. So there was a feeling, and it was happening behind closed doors, and not all of the councilors were part of that conversation. And there were questions during meetings that were ignored, and just wanting to say, why are we tearing apart Adams Village? Why are we cutting a business district right up through the middle? Why are we taking parishes which are very strong in history in our neighborhoods in our city? Like, why is St. Anne's going to be cut in half and St. Brendan's now is part of the Lower Mills, St. Greg's district? Because forever, the Adams Corner and St. Brendan's, and we also have a really high voting turnout. There's super voters in those districts. So to me, in putting them to D4, which is, the district councilor, one other thing I want to be clear on. We have 4 opportunity districts in the city of Boston. Based on demographics, there's numbers you plug in, and based on the number of minorities that live in the city of Boston, we need to keep our 4 opportunity districts, and that means that there's a majority minority population. District 3 has always been an opportunity district, and it has always had a majority minority population. There was a misconception by many that District 3 needed to take some white people out because it wasn't a minority majority. For decades, it's always been a minority majority district. We have a strong Vietnamese community in the Fields Corner area, a large African American and Cape Verdean community, all the way up, the Polish community up through South Boston. So there was no need to adjust any precincts based on race, and it's against the law to make maps based on race. You're supposed to keep population and other matters in mind, especially when you know that the current numbers in a district are for Voter Rights Act. Because at the end of the day, what we want to make sure is that every person has the opportunity to elect somebody of their choice. It doesn't say what color they are. It just talks about, did we draw the maps, which we know, I mean, across the country.
Yeah.
There's lots of people, and gerrymandering, the word came from Massachusetts, where people will look at pockets and they're like, oh, I want to pick up that
Yeah.
neighborhood, or how do I get to pick up this neighborhood? So there was definitely gerrymandering, in my opinion, and pulling precincts out, and not for the right reasons. When District 3 needed to add 5,000 people, and the first thing we did is we cut the bottom of the district out, that for years have been, part of that fabric of that community, and tearing apart the power, political power of one group in that community of interest group, which is where I live. If the current map stands, my mother and my aunt and many of my friends and family now are in District 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm right on the line there.
So again, this matter is still in the court,
It
right?
is.
And there's going to be more hearings regarding it, right?
No, it was done, unless the
Okay.
judge tells us we have to go back to the drawing board, because she agrees that if she files an injunction and says she agrees that the lines were drawn. And if she comes back and says she doesn't agree, then the map that was voted on November 2nd passes, and those are the lines for the upcoming fall election.
What I like, our time is just about gone. I'd like to send you a broadcast that was done here,
Oh, yeah.
talking all about this with people who are actually in the courtroom observing this, because we need more time to talk about
Absolutely.
this.
I'd love to.
I'm going to give you 1 minute
Yeah.
to tell people why they should consider you.
Absolutely.
And then we have to, as the
For
kids
one
say,
of-
we have to bounce.
We've got to bounce. We've got to get out. So yes, this fall I'll be up for re-election, and I would really, it's been an honor to be an at-large city councilor representing people across the city. There's a lot of work that we've started. There's a lot of good things we've done, but there's a lot of need in this city.
Yeah.
And I believe that I've shown that I kept my promise, that I'm going to work hard, I'm
Yeah.
going to show up, I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, and my opinions and change based on the more I learn. So some things that I thought mattered don't matter now, and other things that I'm going to work hard to fix, and so that matters to me. So I do believe the work is not done. We've got to keep on working. We're not finished. So I would be honored, humbled if people consider me for one of their 4 at-large votes this fall, because you put me back there, and you're going to continue to get someone who is answering calls. Constituent services are like top on our list of priorities, and I know that we've been connecting with neighbors all across the city, helping them. We're a rich city, and I do believe my job is to make the city work better for the residents of the city of Boston. And so we'll continue to make those relationships with city departments and connect people to the rich resources we have, and be a voice. I knew as a teacher, many families don't feel like their voice is respected or heard. And it's one of the things that I take very seriously, and I'll continue to do. And that is absolutely not on race lines for me. That's on just human lines. If you need me to be your voice in city council, I'm not afraid to speak up, even if I don't have the votes at the time, but I'm just going to keep plugging away. And I do believe that councilors will see the work that we're doing is valuable, and it's helping people. So we'll get there. It may not be as quick as most people want, and I do respect that the city does see us as a body that should work better together, and I do pledge and believe that we have that obligation to the city of Boston, and I'll continue to show up, work hard, and be transparent.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you came on today, and
Thank you.
I want this to be the first of many discussions that we're going to have.
Absolutely.
And so I appreciate your time, and
Thank you.
look forward to continuing
No,
to talk.
No, thank you. This has been fun.